The crystal chandeliers of the Stirling Davenport Manor cast a diamond-like glow on the scene below. Olivia Hayes, her hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her stomach, beneath layers of white satin, looked into her new husband's eyes. Ethan Davenport, impossibly handsome in his bespoke tuxedo, smiled a smile so perfect it could have been photoshopped. This was it, the culmination of a fairy tale she never dared to dream. Her modest past was behind her, and a future of love and security stretched ahead. But as the band began to play, a ripple of unease spread through the gilded hall. A woman in a blood-red dress had just appeared, and the perfect smile on Ethan's face began to crack. Olivia felt the weight of the day settle upon her shoulders, a pleasant burden woven from lace silk and the heavy scent of 1,000 white roses. The Stirling Davenport Manor wasn't just a venue, it was a declaration, a sprawling stone testament to generations of wealth, its manicured lawns rolling down to a private lake that shimmered like a sheet of hammered silver under the afternoon sun. Every detail from the string quartet playing softly in the grand foyer to the ice sculpture of 2 intertwined swans was a reminder that she, Olivia Hayes, daughter of a retired mechanic from a quiet suburban street, was now a Davenport. She smoothed a hand over the intricate beading of her gown, the gesture less about the dress and more about the life stirring within it. At 5 months pregnant, she was more than just a bride. She was the future matriarch, the carrier of the next Davenport heir. Or so Ethan had whispered to her during their first dance, his breath warm against her ear. He had been her rock, her champion against the quiet, cutting disapproval of his family. His mother, Victoria Davenport, was the architect of that disapproval. A woman sculpted from ice and ambition, Victoria moved through the world as if it were a boardroom she was about to conquer. From their first meeting, she had looked at Olivia not as a potential daughter-in-law, but as a hostile takeover bid. Her compliments were thinly veiled assessments, her smile a weapon sheathed only for public appearances. "Such a simple rustic charm you have, dear," she'd said, her eyes cataloguing Olivia's off-the-rack dress. "Ethan has always been fascinated by the unadorned." Today Victoria was a vision in slate grey, her expression one of regal endurance, as if she were weathering a particularly unpleasant but necessary business merger. She hadn't wanted this wedding. She had wanted her son to marry someone from their world, someone whose bloodline was as pedigreed as their stock portfolio, someone like Sophia Stirling. The thought of Sophia sent a familiar, unwelcome chill down Olivia's spine. Sophia was Ethan's business partner, a woman as sharp and dazzling as a shard of glass. They had co-founded a successful tech venture capital firm, and their names were often linked in business journals and society pages. Ethan had always been dismissive of Olivia's concerns. "She's practically family live," he'd say with an easy laugh. "Her family co-owned this estate with mine generations ago. We've known each other since we were in diapers. It's purely platonic." Yet Olivia had seen the way Sophia looked at Ethan, a possessive fire in her eyes that went far beyond professional partnership. And she had felt the sting of Sophia's condescension, her backhanded compliments about Olivia's bravery for entering a world she knew nothing about. Sophia hadn't been invited today, a point on which Olivia had insisted, and Ethan had, after a surprisingly tense argument, conceded. The victory had felt hollow, a temporary reprieve rather than a permanent solution. Standing near the towering 7-tiered cake was her own small contingent of reality. Her father, Robert Hayes, looked profoundly uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, his mechanic's hands scrubbed clean, but still bearing the faint tracery of a lifetime of honest work clasped awkwardly in front of him. He was a man of quiet integrity, more at home under the hood of a car than in a hall dripping with chandeliers. He loved Olivia fiercely and trusted Ethan conditionally. "He seems like a good man," he'd told her, "but money like that, it changes the rules, Liv. Just be careful." His words echoed in her mind, now a quiet hum of caution beneath the joyful music. Beside him was Jessica Miller, Olivia's maid of honor, and her oldest friend. Jessica, a fiery redhead with an uncanny ability to spot insincerity at 100 paces, had never trusted Ethan. "He's too polished," she'd argued more than once over cheap wine in Olivia's tiny apartment. "Nobody is that perfect. It's like he's playing a part, and I keep waiting for him to forget his lines." Today Jessica wore a brave smile and a bridesmaid's dress. She loathed her eyes, scanning the crowd with the vigilance of a Secret Service agent. She was Olivia's shield, her anchor to the person she was before the whirlwind of the Davenport world had swept her up. Ethan materialized at her side, his arm sliding possessively around her waist. "Happy, Mrs. Davenport," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Ecstatic," she breathed, leaning into his strength. In his arms the doubts receded. Victoria's coldness, Sophia's shadow, her father's worries, they all seemed like foolish anxieties. Ethan loved her. He had chosen her. He had stood before God and 300 of the East Coast's most influential people and promised to cherish her and their child. That had to be enough. "I have to go speak to Mr. Harrison for a moment," he said, gesturing towards a stern-looking older man with a formidable white mustache. "He's a major investor. Be right back, my love." He strode away effortlessly, slipping back into the role of the charming business scion. Olivia watched him go, a swell of pride and love filling her chest. She saw Victoria intercept him, her hand on his arm, her expression intense as she whispered something in his ear. Ethan's smile tightened for a fraction of a second before he nodded and moved on. A tiny crack in the perfect facade. Olivia told herself she was imagining it. This was her wedding day. It was perfect. It had to be. The reception was in full swing, a symphony of clinking champagne flutes, polite laughter, and the smooth sounds of a live jazz ensemble. The initial formalities were over. The first dance had been danced, the cake had been cut with a silver knife that was a Davenport family heirloom, and the toasts had begun. Jessica had delivered a speech that was both funny and deeply touching, sharing anecdotes from their childhood that made Olivia's eyes well with tears. Robert Hayes had followed his voice, thick with emotion, as he spoke of his daughter's kindness and strength, ending with a simple, direct message to Ethan: "You take care of my girl." The room had applauded warmly. Even Victoria had managed a tight, vaguely approving nod. Now Ethan's best man, a slick fraternity brother named Paul, was at the microphone recounting a mildly embarrassing story about a college trip to Cabo. Olivia was laughing her head, resting on Ethan's shoulder, feeling a deep, bone-settling contentment. For the first time all day, she felt like she truly belonged. The enormous, intimidating room felt warm and full of light. It was then that the light seemed to shift. The massive oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open, held by 2 uniformed staff members. The murmur of the crowd did not so much quiet as change in pitch curiosity, rippling through the guests like a breeze across water. A woman stood framed in the doorway, and for a moment she was just a silhouette against the fading evening light. Then she stepped forward into the glow of the chandeliers, and Olivia's heart stopped. It was Sophia Sterling. She was not dressed as a wedding guest. She wore a bespoke gown of crimson silk that clung to her statuesque frame like a second skin. It was a dress designed to command attention, a slash of vibrant, defiant color in a room of muted, celebratory pastels. Her dark hair was styled in a severe, elegant chignon, and a diamond necklace glittered at her throat, a cold, hard fire. She looked magnificent, terrifying and utterly out of place. A wave of whispers washed over the room. "Is that Sophia Sterling? I thought she was in Zurich. What is she wearing?" Olivia's hand tightened on Ethan's arm. "What is she doing here?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan had gone rigid beside her. All the colour had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask. His perfect smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He didn't answer her. He just stared at Sophia as she began to move through the room. She walked with a predator's grace, her heels clicking a sharp staccato rhythm on the polished marble floor. She didn't hurry. She savoured the attention, her eyes scanning the room, a small, knowing smile playing on her perfectly painted red lips. She nodded at a few familiar faces, a queen acknowledging her court. People parted for her, as if she were royalty or a contagion. Victoria Davenport's reaction was the most curious of all. Olivia expected fury, an icy command for security to remove the intruder. Instead, Victoria simply watched Sophia's approach, her expression unreadable. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a cold, calculating stillness. It was the look of a chess master watching a predictable and perhaps even welcome move from her opponent. Jessica was on her feet, her bridesmaid's bouquet clenched in her fist like a weapon. "I'll handle this," she hissed, her eyes blazing. "No, wait," Olivia said, her voice trembling. She needed to understand. This couldn't be happening. Sophia reached the head table. She ignored Olivia completely, her gaze fixed solely on Ethan. "Ethan, darling," she said, her voice a low, throaty purr that carried through the suddenly silent hall. "You didn't really think you could have a party like this and not invite me, did you?" Ethan found his voice, though it was strained. "Sophia, now is not the time." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," she replied, her smile widening. She glanced around the opulent room at the stunned faces of the guests, her eyes finally landing on Olivia's pregnant belly. A flicker of something ugly and triumphant passed through her gaze. A time for celebration, a time for toasts, a time for truth. She turned and with a flick of her wrist smoothly took the microphone from the stunned best man's hand. He simply gaped at her, his Cobbo story forgotten. Sophia tapped the microphone once the sharp sound echoing through the cavernous space. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice now amplified, dripping with a poisonous charm. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sophia Sterling. I'm Ethan's business partner, but I'm also so much more than that." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I'd like to propose a toast to the happy couple." The silence in the room was absolute. The band had stopped playing. The waiters froze in place trays balanced precariously. Every single eye was on the woman in red, the uninvited guest who now held the entire wedding captive. Olivia felt a cold dread seeping into her bones. The fairy tale was over. The nightmare was just beginning. Sophia held the microphone with the casual confidence of someone born to the stage. She surveyed the audience of financial titans, society mavens, and political figures, her smile a brilliant predatory thing. The initial shock in the room was curdling into a tense, voyeuristic anticipation. This was better than gossip. This was a public execution. To Ethan, she began raising an imaginary glass. A man of exceptional ambition. Her voice was laced with a sarcasm so sharp it could have drawn blood. He knows what he wants, and he's not afraid to do whatever it takes to get it. Whether it's a controlling share in a company or... Her eyes slid deliberately over to Olivia, lingering on her with theatrical pity. a bride who will secure the family line. A collective gasp went through the room. Ethan stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. Sophia, that's enough. Security. But Sophia just laughed a sound that was both musical and utterly chilling. Oh, sit down, Ethan. Don't be a bore. The security team reports to your mother, and as you can see, she gestured vaguely towards Victoria, who remained unnervingly still. She seems perfectly content to let me have my say. It was true. Victoria's lack of action was a tacit endorsement. This was not a disruption. It was part of the program. The realization hit Olivia with the force of a physical blow. Sophia turned her attention back to the room. You see, everyone here thinks this is a love story, a handsome prince finding his Cinderella. It's a charming narrative. But the truth is a little more complicated. Our prince has been a very, very busy man. She began to walk, slowly pacing in front of the head table, like a lawyer delivering her closing argument. Just 3 weeks ago, our devoted groom was in Milan with me. We stayed at the Principe di Savoia, Suite 508. He told me the Davenport-Sterling merger was the only thing on his mind, and it was, she purred, in a manner of speaking. Olivia felt the room spin. 3 weeks ago, Ethan had told her he was at a tech conference in Berlin. He'd sent selfies from in front of the Brandenburg Gate. They must have been old photos. The casual, premeditated nature of the lie was a knife in her gut. He has such a romantic soul, Sophia continued, her voice dripping with mock affection. He bought me a beautiful Bulgari bracelet. This one, in fact. She held up her wrist, and the same snakehead bracelet Olivia had admired in a magazine, the one Ethan had called garish, glittered under the lights. He said the emeralds matched my eyes. What did he say about your eyes, Olivia? That they're as wide and trusting as a fawn's. He always did have a weakness for helpless creatures. The cruelty was breathtakingly precise. Every word was a poisoned dart aimed directly at Olivia's deepest insecurities. She felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, some filled with pity, others with a kind of morbid glee. She was no longer a bride. She was a spectacle. Let's talk about promises, Sophia said, her tone hardening. The promises he made to me in that suite in Milan. The promises he made last week in the back of his car after our board meeting. The promises he whispered to me this morning on his wedding day when he called to say this whole thing was a charade he had to go through. The lie was so audacious, so specific, that Olivia almost believed it was true. She looked at Ethan, pleading with her eyes for him to deny it, to shout this woman down to fight for her. But he just stood there, his face a mess of sweat and panicked indecision. His silence was a confession. It was the most damning evidence of all. Sophia stopped directly in front of Olivia, now close enough that Olivia could smell her expensive, cloying perfume. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the microphone still carried to every corner of the room. He told me he was trapped, that you were an unfortunate complication. Then Sophia straightened up and addressed the crowd again, her voice ringing with triumph. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Olivia's stomach. And then there's the grand prize, the little heir, the anchor meant to drag the Davenport ship into a safe harbor. She let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any real humor. Did you really think a baby would be enough to chain a man like Ethan Davenport? Did you honestly believe that this family— She made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the stony-faced Victoria— would welcome your contribution? This family doesn't welcome mongrels into its pedigree. The word hung in the air, ugly and obscene. Mongrel. It struck Olivia harder than any other insult. It wasn't just about her. It was about her unborn child, her baby. A wave of nausea and a fierce, protective rage washed over her. The tears that had been threatening finally fell hot and shameful, tracing paths through her carefully applied makeup. The perfect day, the perfect dress, the perfect life, it had all been shattered into a million pieces at her feet. She was a fool, a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing, and the whole world was watching her break. The silence that followed Sophia's final venomous word was thick and suffocating. It was broken only by the sound of Olivia's choked sob. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, their fingers hovering over the phones they were using to record the carnage. This was a scandal for the ages, a story that would be whispered about at cocktail parties and charity galas for months to come. The Davenports were imploding, and everyone had a front row seat. Ethan, finally spurred to action by the sheer horror of the situation, stammered, "Sophia, get out. Just get out." His voice was weak, pathetic. It held no authority, only the pleading of a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Sophia just smirked, her work done. She placed the microphone back on its stand with a deliberate click, the sound as final as a gavel. Security guards, large men in ill-fitting suits, began to move hesitantly towards the head table, unsure of who their orders should come from. From the furious-looking bride's side, or from Victoria Davenport, who still sat as serene and still as a marble effigy. But before they could take more than 2 steps, another figure moved. It was Robert Hayes. He rose from his seat at a nearby table with a quiet, unhurried grace that seemed to command more attention than all of Sophia's histrionics. He was not a large man. Years of bending over engine blocks had given him a slight stoop, and his rented tuxedo seemed to hang on his frame rather than fit it. But as he walked towards the dais, there was an aura of unshakable dignity about him. He moved through the sea of wealth and power like a granite boulder in a shallow stream. He walked past the confused security guards, who seemed to shrink back from the silent intensity in his eyes. He didn't look at the whispering guests. His focus was entirely on the tableau of betrayal at the head table. He stopped not in front of Sophia, the source of the vitriol, but directly in front of Ethan. He stood there for a long moment, simply looking at the young man who had promised to love and protect his daughter. His eyes, the same clear blue as Olivia's, held a universe of disappointment. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was low and steady, roughened by age and unfiltered cigarettes, and it cut through the silence with absolute authority. "I don't know much about your world." He began, his gaze never leaving Ethan's. "I don't understand hostile takeovers or offshore accounts. I've worked with my hands my entire life. When I fix a man's car, I look him in the eye and I guarantee my work. That's my word. That's my bond." He took a small step closer. Ethan flinched. "I taught my daughter about that, about integrity, about how your name is the only thing you truly own. You stand by your word, you protect your family, and you face your mistakes like a man. Simple rules, the kind of rules that build a life you can be proud of." He paused, letting the words settle. The room was so quiet, the hum of the air conditioning was audible. "You stood up today in a church. You spoke words, vows, promises. Were they just noise to you? A business transaction? You didn't just lie to my daughter." Robert said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a gravelly repository of controlled fury. "You disrespected the very idea of a promise. You stood there holding her hand, the mother of your child, and you made a mockery of everything that should be sacred between 2 people. You are not a man. You are a coward, a hollow, gilded shell of a person. You are a disgrace, not just to Olivia, but to the very idea of what a husband and a father should be." He didn't raise his voice, he didn't gesture wildly. His power was in his stillness, in the profound, unimpeachable truth of his words. He had stripped Ethan bare, exposing the weak, frightened boy beneath the expensive suit. Then Robert turned his attention to Victoria Davenport. His expression hardened. He looked at this powerful, untouchable woman as if she were something he'd found leaking oil onto his garage floor. "And you?" He said the word, dripping with a contempt that no amount of money could deflect. "You sat there and watched. You let this happen. You think your money makes you better than everyone else. You think these walls and these diamonds give you class." He shook his head slowly, a look of deep, profound pity on his face. "All the money in the world can't buy you a conscience, lady. It can't buy you a heart. You raised this spineless thing." He gestured dismissively at Ethan. "And you have the audacity to look down on my daughter. She has more character in her little finger than your whole rotten family tree combined." He had said his piece. He turned his back on them, a final damning dismissal. He walked over to the weeping Olivia, his calloused hands gently taking hers. "Come on, Liv," he said softly, his voice now filled only with love. "Let's go home. There's nothing for you here." As Robert helped a trembling Olivia to her feet, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The initial hungry shock of the guests was transmuting into something else. Robert's quiet, powerful speech had acted as a catalyst, changing the chemistry of the room. He had drawn a clear line, not between rich and poor, but between honor and dishonor. The first to cross that line was Mr. Harrison, the formidable investor with the white mustache, whom Ethan had been so eager to impress earlier. He was an old money patriarch, a man whose business acumen was matched only by his legendary temper and his rigid, almost archaic code of personal conduct. He had been observing the entire debacle with a stony expression. Now he stood up, his towering frame commanding immediate attention. He deliberately walked not to Ethan or Victoria, but to Robert Hayes. He extended a hand. "Robert Hayes," he said, his voice booming through the hall. "My name is Arthur Harrison. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Robert, surprised, shook his hand. "Sir, that was the finest speech I've heard in 20 years. Harrison declared, his grip firm. "Well said, sir. Well said." He then turned his cold eyes sweeping over Ethan and Victoria. "Ethan," he boomed, "consider the Harrison Group's $10 million seed investment in your new tech fund rescinded. I don't do business with men who have no honor. And Victoria, your blatant complicity in this disgusting spectacle is a new low even for you." A tremor went through the Davenport side of the room. Harrison pulling out was not just a financial blow. It was a devastating social one. He was a kingmaker, and he had just pronounced them lepers. Before the Davenports could even process this, a second voice rang out. It belonged to Beatrice Vanderbilt, a society doyenne in her late 70s, renowned for her philanthropy and feared for her sharp tongue. She was the gatekeeper of New York's most exclusive charities. "Victoria," she called out, her voice thin but carrying the unmistakable ring of authority. "I am officially withdrawing my foundation's support for the Children's Hospital Gala. I will not have my name associated with a family that publicly humiliates a pregnant woman and speaks of an unborn child as a mongrel. It is utterly reprehensible." And then the dam broke. It started as a trickle and quickly became a flood. A prominent lawyer stood up and announced he was dropping Ethan as a client. The owner of a prestigious art gallery loudly cancelled a planned showing of Victoria's private collection. People began to stand, not to get a better look, but to leave. But they didn't just slip out the back. Their departure was a performance. It was a public, deliberate, and systematic dismantling of the Davenport social empire. Many of these guests had long chafed under Victoria's tyrannical social rule or had been burned by Ethan's ruthless business practices. They had smiled at the Davenports' parties and accepted their invitations, but beneath the surface, resentment simmered. Sophia's drama and Robert's integrity had given them the perfect excuse, a righteous banner under which to finally rebel. They walked past the head table, a parade of condemnation. Some offered quiet words of support to Olivia as they passed. "You are better off, my dear," one woman whispered, squeezing her arm. "Be strong for your baby," said another. A man pressed a business card into Robert's hand. "If your daughter needs a lawyer pro bono, she should call me." The gift table became a site of protest. Guests who had deposited lavish gifts on their way in now stopped on their way out to retrieve them. A Tiffany box was snatched back. A large envelope, likely containing a substantial check, was pocketed. The pile of presents dwindled rapidly, a stark visual metaphor for the Davenports' collapsing fortune. Ethan, Victoria, and Sophia could only watch, frozen in a state of disbelief. They had expected shame, gossip, perhaps a few awkward weeks. They had not expected this. This was not a scandal. It was a revolution. The guests weren't just shunning them, they were erasing them. They were stripping them of their power, their influence, their very identity in this world they had so effortlessly commanded. The wedding that was meant to be the ultimate display of their status had become the site of their spectacular public ruin. The unbelievable was happening. Their own world was turning on them, and it was doing so in defense of the one person they believed had no power at all. The grand ballroom, once filled with the buzz of 300 of society's elite, was now a cavern of echoing silence. Only a handful of people remained, Olivia, her father, and Jessica, who stood like a protective phalanx around her, and the toxic trio of Ethan, Victoria, and Sophia, marooned at the head table amidst the ruins of their celebration. The half-eaten food, the wilting floral arrangements, the abandoned glasses of champagne, it all looked like the aftermath of a lavish shipwreck. The departing guests had offered Olivia a strange, empowering clarity. Their support had been a balm on her raw humiliation, transforming her from a victim into a symbol. But the final, most venomous act of the tragedy was yet to play out. Victoria Davenport finally rose from her chair. The mask of icy composure was gone, replaced by a twisted visage of pure, undiluted rage. Her plan, whatever it had been, had backfired spectacularly. She had lost control, and it was making her reckless. She advanced on Olivia, her slate-grey dress rustling with menace. "You," she spat, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won, don't you? You think these sentimental fools leaving en masse means anything?" Robert stepped in front of Olivia. "That's enough. We're leaving. I'm not finished." Victoria snarled, her eyes locked on Olivia. "You need to understand the full scope of your stupidity." She paused, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Did you really think this was all Sophia's idea? That she just crashed the party out of jealous rage?" Victoria laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "She was my guest. I invited her. I wanted her to do this." The confession hung in the air, more shocking than the affair itself. Ethan looked at his mother, his expression one of dawning horror. Even Sophia seemed taken aback by this admission. "Why?" Olivia whispered the question raw with pain. "Why would you do this to your own son, to your own grandchild?" "Because you were a mistake I had to correct," Victoria said, her voice dripping with venom. "Because you, a nobody with a swelling belly, thought you could trap my son and leech off this family for the rest of your life. I would not allow it." She began to pace, her fury making her eloquent. "I knew about the affair, of course. I've always known about Ethan's indiscretions. They're a tiresome but manageable part of who he is. I knew I couldn't stop the wedding. The publicity was already in motion. But I could control the outcome." She stopped, and looked directly at Olivia. "You signed a prenuptial agreement, you little fool. A very ironclad one. But my lawyers told me that even the best prenup can be challenged, especially with a child involved. There was, however, a standard fidelity clause. It states that if either party is unfaithful during the marriage, the other party is entitled to a significant settlement." Victoria's eyes glittered with manic triumph. The key phrase is "during the marriage." An affair before the wedding means nothing, but an affair that is proven to be ongoing after the vows are spoken, but before the marriage is consummated, that, my dear, creates a legal grey area, one I was not willing to risk. She leaned in closer. So I devised a better plan, a public humiliation so profound, so utterly devastating, that you would be the one to leave. I wanted you to walk out of this reception, to flee in shame before the wedding night, thereby annulling the marriage and voiding the prenup entirely. I wanted to make sure you left with nothing but the bastard in your belly. The sheer diabolical cruelty of the plan was stunning. It wasn't just about money. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare designed to break Olivia completely. Victoria hadn't just allowed the humiliation. She had orchestrated it as a legal strategy. She had been willing to sacrifice her son's reputation and the dignity of her own family name simply to ensure a pregnant girl from the suburbs got nothing. Ethan finally spoke, his voice a broken whisper. "Mother, you didn't. Tell me you didn't." Victoria shot him a look of withering contempt. "Oh, grow up, Ethan. You knew this girl was a liability. I simply did what was necessary to protect our family's assets. You should be thanking me." But her plan had failed. She had underestimated Olivia's father. She had underestimated the simmering resentment of her peers. And most of all, she had underestimated the basic human decency that, when faced with such naked cruelty, could spark a rebellion. She had intended to isolate Olivia to make her a pariah. Instead, she had made her a martyr and turned herself, her son, and her star witness into the villains of the story. The empty hall was a testament not to Olivia's shame, but to Victoria's profound miscalculation. The full weight of Victoria's confession settled upon Olivia, not as a crushing blow, but as a moment of terrible, liberating clarity. The pain was still there, a hot, searing agony in her chest, but beneath it, a new feeling was taking root, a cold, hard strength. She had been grieving the loss of a fairy tale, but the fairy tale had never been real. It was a gilded cage, and Victoria had just handed her the key. She looked at the three people before her. Sophia, whose smug triumph had curdled into uncertainty, realizing she was just a disposable tool. Ethan, a weak, broken man-child, staring at his mother as if seeing her for the first time, finally understanding he was a pawn in her game, not a king. And Victoria, a woman so consumed by wealth and control that she would burn down her own house to kill a mouse. Olivia's tears had stopped. Her breathing steadied. She was surrounded by the only people in this opulent nightmare who truly mattered: her father, whose love was as solid and reliable as the earth beneath his feet, and her best friend, whose loyalty was a fierce, unwavering flame. Slowly, deliberately, Olivia pulled the engagement ring from her finger. It was a monstrous thing, a 10-carat diamond that had always felt foreign and heavy on her hand. It wasn't a symbol of love. It was a beautifully crafted manacle. She didn't throw it. She didn't make a grand, dramatic gesture. She walked to the head table, her movements calm and measured, and placed it gently on the white linen cloth beside a half-empty glass of champagne. The clink was barely audible, but it echoed with finality. She turned to Ethan. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were tempered by a profound sense of pity. He wasn't a monster. He was just nothing. An empty vessel, filled only with his mother's ambition and his own fear. "I used to feel sorry for you," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of the tremor it had held just minutes before. "I thought you were trapped by your mother, by your family's expectations. I thought I could save you." She shook her head, a small, sad gesture. "But you don't want to be saved. You're comfortable in your cage. You didn't lose a wife today, Ethan. You lost the only person who ever saw a good man inside the coward and was foolish enough to love him anyway." Then she faced Victoria. She looked the older woman directly in the eye, meeting her hateful glare with a calm strength that seemed to unnerve the formidable matriarch. "You're right about one thing," Olivia said. "I don't belong here. I was so dazzled by the money and the fantasy that I almost forgot who I am. I am the daughter of a man who values his word above all else. A man who taught me that wealth has nothing to do with what's in your bank account, and everything to do with the love you give and the integrity you keep." She placed a hand on her belly. "You call my child a bastard and a mongrel, but this baby will be born from love, my love, and they will be raised in a home rich with things your money can never buy: honesty, courage, and unconditional love. You can keep your money, you can keep this empty house, and you can keep your hollow son. My father taught me about a different kind of wealth, and today I've finally realized I am the richest woman in this room." With that, she turned her back on them. She took her father's waiting arm and Jessica's hand. The three of them walked away, a unified front of simple, powerful love. They walked across the marble floor, past the abandoned tables and the mocking ice sculpture of the two swans, now slowly melting under the heat of the lights. They didn't look back. They walked out of the Stirling Davenport Manor and into the cool, clean air of the evening. The last image was not of a bride in tatters, but of a woman reclaiming her soul. She was walking away from the ruins of a life that was never hers toward an unknown future. It would be difficult, it would be a struggle, but it would be real. And for the first time in a very long time, Olivia Hayes, not Davenport, was free. The journey away from the Stirling Davenport Manor was a silent 20-mile scream. Olivia sat in the passenger seat of her father's aging, but impeccably maintained, Ford pickup, the stiff fabric of the bench seat, a world away from the plush leather of Ethan's Bentley. The ridiculously expensive couture wedding gown, now feeling like a costume from a life she'd only pretended to live, bunched uncomfortably around her legs. She stared out the window, watching the grand gated estates of the super-rich give way to the modest, familiar houses of her hometown. Each passing mile felt like a journey back through time, erasing the last 18 months of her life. Jessica sat in the back, her phone buzzing incessantly in her hand, a furious energy radiating from her. She was fielding texts and calls from friends and family, her replies short and sharp. But inside the cab of the truck, a fragile truce of silence held. There were no words big enough to contain the enormity of what had just happened. Robert drove with a steady, quiet focus, his hands sure on the wheel, his presence a solid, comforting anchor in Olivia's swirling vortex of shock and pain. He didn't offer platitudes or ask if she was okay. He knew she wasn't, and he knew that the only thing he could offer right now was the simple, profound act of taking her home. When they pulled into the driveway of the small blue house where Olivia had grown up, the dam of her composure finally broke. This was real. The fairy tale was over, and she was back where she started, only now she was pregnant, publicly humiliated, and carrying the wreckage of a life that had been a lie. A deep, guttural sob escaped her, a sound of such raw agony that it seemed to tear its way out of her soul. Her father was there in an instant, opening her door, his strong arms wrapping around her as he helped her out of the truck. She collapsed against his chest, the scent of garage oil and Old Spice filling her senses, the most comforting smell in the world. "I've got you, Liv," he murmured, his voice thick. "I've always got you." Inside the house was a sanctuary of normalcy, the familiar ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the faint smell of the pot roast Robert had made the day before, the worn floral sofa. It all conspired to ground her. Jessica, her fierce anger momentarily softening into gentle efficiency, helped Olivia out of the monstrous wedding dress. As the layers of silk and lace pooled on the floor, it felt like shedding a skin. Jessica handed her a pair of her father's old soft sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. Dressed in these borrowed clothes, feeling small and fragile, Olivia curled up on the sofa, and the full wrenching grief she had been holding at bay washed over her. The hours that followed were a blur of tears and fragmented conversations. Jessica paced the living room like a caged tigress, her phone now a weapon. "The videos are everywhere. Liv," she said, her voice a low growl. "That witch Sophia Victoria, Ethan. They are getting crucified online. Davenport disaster is trending worldwide." She wanted to call lawyers to sue for defamation, emotional distress, for everything. "We can destroy them," she vowed. Robert, in contrast, was a quiet harbour. He made tea that Olivia couldn't drink and toast she couldn't eat. He sat in his worn armchair, not hovering but simply being present. When Olivia's sobs would subside into shuddering breaths, he would speak. "It's not your shame, Olivia," he said, his voice calm and certain. "It's theirs. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You loved someone. You trusted someone. There is no shame in a heart that is open." Through the long, dark night, Olivia wrestled with the hydra of Victoria's cruelty. It was one thing to be cheated on. It was another to learn that your entire relationship had been viewed as a hostile merger, your love a liability, and your child a legal complication to be neutralized. The kindness Ethan had shown her, the late-night talks, the promises of a future, had it all been a performance, a calculated charade to keep the asset, the heir-producing womb, placid until it was no longer needed. The depth of the deception was a poison, seeping into every good memory she had, twisting it into something ugly and false. She wasn't just grieving a man. She was grieving her own judgment, her own naivete, her own heart. She must have fallen into an exhausted sleep at some point, because she awoke to the pale grey light of dawn filtering through the living room blinds. For a disorienting second, she didn't know where she was. Then the weight of the previous day crashed back down. She was in her father's house. She was 30 years old, pregnant, and her life had been detonated. Jessica was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, a mug of coffee in her hands. She looked up, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and concern. "Morning. You're famous." She turned the laptop around. The screen was filled with headlines from major news outlets and society blogs. Davenport heir's wedding ends in public implosion. Video father of the bride delivers scathing takedown of billionaire in-laws. The Sterling Rebellion. How a wedding walkout toppled a social dynasty. The story had taken on a life of its own. The narrative was overwhelmingly fiercely on her side. Comment sections were flooded with support for her and her father, and visceral hatred for the Davenports and Sophia Sterling. Her father's speech had been transcribed and was being shared as a masterclass in integrity. A grainy cell phone video of the guests retrieving their wedding gifts had gone viral. She wasn't just a jilted bride. She had become a symbol of defiance against the callous arrogance of the ultra-rich. Seeing it all laid out, seeing the public's validation, didn't erase the pain, but it cauterized the wound of her humiliation. She wasn't a fool. She was the survivor of a calculated, cruel attack, and the world saw it for what it was. As she was reading her father's old landline phone, a relic he refused to give up rang shrilly from the kitchen wall. Robert answered it, his voice a low rumble. He listened for a moment, his eyebrows shooting up. "Yes, she's here," he said. He listened again. "I see. Hold on." He covered the mouthpiece with his hand and looked at Olivia. "It's Arthur Harrison." Olivia stared at him confused. "Mr. Harrison, the investor. He wants to talk to you." Robert said, an unreadable expression on his face. "He said it's important." Hesitantly, Olivia took the old, heavy receiver. "Hello," she said, her voice raspy from crying. "Ms. Hayes," the powerful, booming voice from the wedding replied, though it was softer now, more considerate. "Arthur Harrison, I hope I am not disturbing you, but I felt I must call. First, let me say on behalf of every decent person in that room, yesterday I am profoundly sorry for the disgusting spectacle you were forced to endure." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," Olivia managed to say. "Please call me Arthur. Now I will get to the point. What I witnessed yesterday was not merely a family dispute. It was a vicious display of corporate and social malfeasance orchestrated by Victoria Davenport, a woman I have long regarded as a piranha in Chanel. Your father's words, Ms. Hayes, they resonated with many of us who have grown weary of the Davenports' particular brand of soulless capitalism." He paused. "The walkout wasn't just about you, though you were the catalyst. It was a mutiny. Years of resentment against Victoria's arrogance and Ethan's unethical business practices boiled over. They broke the unspoken rules of our world, and they did so in the cruelest way imaginable. They have made themselves untouchable, and not in the way they're used to." Olivia listened, stunned. "Which brings me to my reason for calling," Arthur continued. "I don't know what your plans are, but I imagine they have been altered. I also imagine that the Davenports Victoria in particular will not make things easy for you, especially concerning your child. They will try to bury you in legal fees or intimidate you into silence." I don't want anything from them," Olivia said quickly. "I just want to be left alone." "A noble sentiment, but a naive one when dealing with vipers," he said bluntly. "They took something from you, and they must be made to pay. Not for your revenge, but for your child's future. To that end, my personal legal team is at your disposal pro bono to handle the annulment and establish a completely firewalled, untouchable trust for your child. Ethan Davenport will provide for his child whether he likes it or not, but you will never have to speak to him or his mother again." Olivia was speechless, tears welling in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of shock and gratitude. "But that's the small thing," Arthur Harrison said, his voice taking on a new tone. "The bigger thing is you. I don't believe in charity, Ms. Hayes. I believe in investing in people of character. And you and your father have shown more character than I've seen in a decade. My family foundation runs a program for female entrepreneurs, particularly women who are restarting their lives after hardship. We provide seed funding, mentorship, and resources. I don't know what you did before you met Ethan Davenport, but I know you are a survivor, and I know you are strong. The offer is on the table. When you are ready, we can help you build something that is entirely your own." He wasn't offering her a handout. He was offering her a ladder, a way to climb out of the ashes on her own terms. She looked at her father, who was watching her with quiet pride. She thought of his words. He's offering you a tool. What you build with it is up to you. The grief was still a raw, open wound. The future was a terrifying blank page. But for the first time since that woman in the red dress walked into the ballroom, Olivia felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was a tiny, fragile spark of resolve. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice stronger now, clearer. "Arthur, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he said kindly. "That's all. Take care of yourself, Ms. Hayes. The world is rooting for you." She hung up the phone, her hand still resting on the receiver. Jessica was looking at her wide-eyed. Her father gave a small, approving nod. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, but a light had just been switched on in the distance. She would not be defined by their cruelty. She would not be a victim. She was Olivia Hayes, daughter of Robert Hayes. She was the mother of a child who would be raised with love and integrity. The Davenport fairy tale was dead. But her own story, the real one, was just about to begin. In the end, Olivia's story wasn't about a wedding that went wrong. It was about a life that was finally set right. She walked away from the Davenport millions, but she walked towards something far more valuable. Her own strength, her father's unwavering love, and the freedom to build a life of genuine worth for herself and her child. The Davenports kept their fortune, but their name became a synonym for dishonor. They won the battle for their money, but lost the war for their reputation, proving that true poverty isn't a lack of funds, but a lack of character. Olivia lost a husband, but she found herself. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating moments of our lives are not endings, but spectacular, necessary beginnings. What would you have done if you were a guest at that wedding? If Olivia's story of resilience and courage moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video to inspire someone who might be facing their own battles, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. Let us know in the comments below what you think about the incredible way the guests stood up for what was right